arms. They sailed away and never regrouped after 1918. So that's where it works. The unorganized militia comes into play when there is no militia left in the state and the governor has to rely on people. That's all able-bodied citizens between the ages of 18 and 45. The governor can tap you to be in the militia by executive order any time he pleases. If you're a citizen of this state, the militia is gone and the governor has to call out the militia. Basically, that's what it is. The militia is federally recognized, the National Guard and Naval Militia, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I have this terrible quarrel with any group, armed or unarmed, arrogating to themselves this title of "we are the militia." They are not the militia. Is it just a quarrel that's specious? No, I have a quarrel because, as I've tried to detail here, and I'm going to sit down in a moment, there are severe checks and balances on the militia that I just discussed with you. The officers of the militia are appointed by the governor. The president has to get on his hands and knees with a begging bowl and beg for levies of troops and sailors if he's going to call out the militia, and the governors approve that. What my quarrel is with self-styled homespun militias, there is no check and balance at all. These are people who simply arrogate to themselves on our behalf that they are the militia, but there is no check and balance. And the word militia does have a bad connotation. The Soviet Union enforced its laws through local militias, and in Somalia, when the U.S. Rangers were dragged through the streets, that was done courtesy of the local militia. That's about all I have to say. Again, my quarrel is with the name. If they are involved in a lawful enterprise, I couldn't support them more. Their right to bear arms, I'm out in front with them, just as I'm sure my colleague, Mr. Rusinello is. So with that, I will sit down and take your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Glazer. Our second speaker is Joseph P. Rusinello. Mr. Rusinello is an attorney and a partner in the San Francisco office of Cooley, Godward, Castro, Huddleston, and Tatum. From January 1982 to March 1990, Mr. Rusinello served as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California. He personally prosecuted Larry Layton of the People's Temple for his part in the murder of Congressman Leo Ryan in Jonestown, Guyana. And he also handled or oversaw numerous other federal cases ranging from espionage to securities fraud. Mr. Rusinello served as a member of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, served as chairman of its White-Collar Crime Subcommittee, and was a member of the Economic Crime Council of the Department of Justice. Mr. Rusinello.
Thank you, David, and good evening to all of you. You have probably heard it said, most often in jest, that the difference between a patriot and a traitor depends on who wins the battle. It reminds me of a story that's now, well, over 35 years old, of a Cuban freedom fighter who was captured at the aborted invasion at the Bay of Pigs. And of course, the Cuban militia at the time was very new to this business, but they took Hector summarily before a court, adjudicated that he was an insurgent, sentenced him to death, and of course took him out to the yard for being dispatched by the firing squad. Well, Hector was out there, he was pinned against the post, and the captain of the guard, who was wearing the uniform of Fidel Castro at the time, but who had this magnificent sword at his side, because after all he was a captain, not just one of the regular militiamen, and had a firing squad of about 20 people arrayed there, all with their AK-47s at the ready. And the captain of the guard sort of pulled out his sword, and he said to his men, he said, "Ready." He said, "Oh, wait a minute." And he went up to Hector and he said, "Hector, you wanted the blindfold?" Hector stood there, proud as could be, and he said, "No blindfold." Fine. Goes back to the firing line, has the sword drawn, and he said, "Aim." Oh, wait a minute. He goes back. "Hector," he said, "you wanted a cigarette?" Hector said, "No cigarette." Fine. Captain goes back to the firing line again. Men are now cranking up their AK-47s. 20 of them arrayed, each one with a couple of hundred rounds at the ready and so on. And he finally, Captain realizes one more thing. He goes back to Hector. He said, "Hector, you got anything you want to say?" And Hector stands there, again, proud as can be, and he said, "Fidel Castro is stink." Hector's, proud saying this. The captain stops, startled, tells his men, he said, wait a minute. He said, "What do you say?" He said, "Fidel Castro is stink." He said, "What are you looking for, trouble?" Seriously, the point of that tall tale is that it puts in sharp focus the contrast between an armed insurgent struggling for a foothold with the objective of ousting the existing authority, unprotected by law or constitutional safeguards on the one hand, and the modern-day militiaman who, while he may harbor some hope that the incumbent power will change its policy in a way more to his own liking, arms himself under the established protection, in our case, the United States Constitution, and in particular the Second Amendment, as Jack Glazer has acknowledged, and exercises it and the rights that it gives him in ways that are both menacing to the general populace and comforting to those within and without our borders who seek to nurture and ferment weakness and disorder. For law enforcement, the great challenge in enforcing the laws that exist is to ensure the public safety while at the same time respecting constitutionally protected prerogatives, privacy rights, and observing some modicum of civility in an environment in which all law enforcement actions are subjected to the most microscopic analysis in an arena of, at times, savage, often heated public debate. How did we get here? What David did not tell you was that I broke in law enforcement after law school in the 60s in the FBI. And after a period of training, of course, we're sent out to our first office agent, and mine was Memphis. Well, the era was the Vietnam War era, late 60s. And of course, campus unrest, agitation against the American policy of involvement in Vietnam was rabid everywhere, more so in some of the major eastern and western cities, but also on campuses in and about Memphis. But we had agents who were assigned then, no disclosing inside information here, whose primary responsibility it was to collect domestic intelligence data on these organizations. And you'll recall that for the longest period of time, the FBI, as the primary domestic intelligence gathering organization, was able to maintain a head start, an insight, an advantage over, many of the sort of planned violent activities that were being perpetrated in that era. At the same time, as a young agent in Memphis, there was a considerable amount of energy that was expended toward infiltrating and, in effect, disemboweling the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Councils. There was very little protest, I might add, at the time. These organizations, which had a structure, they had a hierarchy, had a very, very particular objective, which was malevolent, but it was one that was recognized as a threat to the United States and to its order, not necessarily to